As you may have noticed by now, T-Rex Labs is a pretty broad YouTube channel. We talk about a lot of different kinds of stuff, but there's a couple of threads that tie everything together. Number one is tools. Almost every video is about a tool in some way or another. And we also love decentralization. Now, today we're going to talk about how money is a tool and how money needs to be decentralized. So we're talking about Bitcoin this week, partly because last week was a big week for Bitcoin. There was a massive Bitcoin conference in Nashville that had some pretty important speakers. You had Trump, you had RFK Jr., you had Vivek, you had a lot of political figures keynoting at this event, talking about Bitcoin and how obstacles to Bitcoin's adoption and Bitcoin's use should be removed.
They're going to keep their hands off crypto. They're going to let it grow. We're going to let it grow. On day one, I will fire Gary Gensler and appoint a new SEC chairman. I didn't know he was that unpopular.
But it isn't just presidential hopefuls who are talking about Bitcoin and wanting to get the crypto bros on their side. Even Kamala Harris admitted that the government and Bitcoin have kind of got off on the wrong foot, and there needs to be some sort of reset of that relationship. This is important, and it's worth noting that there wasn't just one Bitcoin event in Nashville. There were two big Bitcoin conferences and a couple of decentralization events, all happening in Nashville, and I went to at least two and maybe three of them, depending on how exactly you count. Now, I didn't make a video while I was there, and I'll explain why a little bit later in this video. But I do think that now is an important time to talk about this for several reasons. Now, Bitcoin is hard to talk about because it's a complicated cryptological process that requires some level of technological understanding, but also because people who do talk about it in completely different ways. Bitcoin is different things to different people. So for some people, it is purely a get-rich-quick solution. It is a very volatile trading market, kind of like commodities or stocks, that they can do high-speed day trading on to make money. And yeah, Bitcoin does work like that. There's also people who talk about Bitcoin as if it is a scam. And it's true that there are scam coins and there are Bitcoin adjacent scams. There is an assumption that Bitcoin is only valuable because of the value that people believe that it has, and that makes it a scam. If that were true, though, that would be true of not only every currency in the history of mankind, but also just, regular objects only having value if we believe them to. And then there are the people who talk about Bitcoin as if it is a currency replacement. They would like to see Bitcoin being used as a decentralized currency to replace the centralized ones that are, if not directly printed by the governments of the world, sort of propped up by the governments of the world. And you can see there's a difference between all these different groups. People who see it as a super valuable thing to invest in because they want direct return, and people who want to replace existing currency with it. And then there are people who talk about it from the purely technical perspective. The blockchain technology and the ways that we need to understand how this is a human-shaping technology that is going to build out some sort of techno-utopia. And there are libertarians and anarcho-capitalists and communists and all kinds of people of very different political stripes who see Bitcoin as some kind of technological savior of our various systems. So when you talk about Bitcoin, you're talking about what people perceive to be all these different things, and you're talking to audiences who have heard radically different messages. So let's just back up a little bit and kind of break this down. The reason that all four of these different groups talk about Bitcoin in these different ways is because Bitcoin can do a lot of different things. It has two very important characteristics to it that other currencies do not. Number one, it is radically decentralized at its core. It doesn't require a centralizing authority to monitor it, and it can be traded very peer-to-peer. The second is that it cannot be inflated. There's a fixed number of Bitcoins, and there can't be any more. And That is why it's no surprise that large government enthusiasts like Kamala Harris and current heads of the SEC don't like Bitcoin. They prefer a currency that is defined by centralization and the ability to inflate it. One of the things that we used to have way back in human history in the ancient past was we used to have currency that was based on raw materials or backed by raw materials or actually was raw materials, like this ounce of silver. This ounce of silver can only be an ounce of silver. There is no way to turn it into 2 ounces of silver inside of some sort of banking application or organization if it is in fact testably, provably 1 ounce of reality-based silver. And when different currencies were based on these types of immutable materials, they were subject to a lot less control. And when they could just be traded freely amongst people, they were subject to a lot less centralization. That is not just the distant past, but the vast majority of human history. It's relatively recent that we have fiat currencies being issued by governments, controlled by governments, propped up by governments, centralized by governments, and kept an eye on by governments. So when I hear people talk about how Bitcoin, an uninflatable and decentralized currency, is some crazy untested scheme, I kind of question that. Now, that being said, Bitcoin isn't perfect. There is a lot of technological, complicated math going on under the hood, so it does require fairly complicated computers and internet connections and, just electricity to keep it running. And in certain disaster situations, it would be very hard for me to prove to you or a guy that I want to buy bottles of water from that I actually have Bitcoin and that I can actually transfer it to him. Something like this silver coin is a little bit more resilient and robust in that way. I could go to the other side of the world, and while people may or may not recognize the actual mint that this thing came from, they would recognize that it is silver, and they would recognize that it has value, with or without the internet. Obviously, you would need the internet if you wanted to check the exact spot prices of the silver, know that it's worth $28, 28 US dollars specifically, but you wouldn't need the internet to know that silver is valuable. It is intrinsically valuable. It is historically valuable. It's been seen as valuable for thousands and thousands of years of human history. Another problem with Bitcoin, people say, is that it's only valuable as long as we think that it is valuable. And that is a good point, but it's also true of all sorts of other materials. The silver is only valuable because we think that it is valuable. If another material comes along that has the attributes of silver, we could decide that silver is now worth less. This is aluminum. Aluminum is worth a lot less than silver, but blocks of aluminum like this that can be machined into other objects have tremendous value. They have more value to a machinist, say, than to just a random guy on the street, but they are worth quite a bit, and they can be turned into things that are worth quite a bit. But I imagine that at some point in the future, I forget the exact date, this boring old opaque aluminum is going to be made obsolete because we'll have transparent aluminum.
Transparent aluminum?
That's the ticket, laddie.
And this boring old opaque aluminum that is pretty cheap to manufacture now and great for machining all kinds of aerospace and other components out of used to be more valuable in the past. Before we knew how to make this stuff in mass quantities, it was extremely rare, which means it was used for jewelry and demonstrations of incredible wealth, like the cap of the Washington Monument used to be an incredible show of wealth because it was made of solid aluminum, and now it's just a nice thing to have on the top of your monuments for anti-corrosion and conductive properties. That's just how things have always been, and that brings me to my next point about money. The way that most people think about Bitcoin is as simply a more decentralized and uninflatable version of fiat currency. This idea that there must be a currency, there must be money that is a currency, and that is what everybody trades, as opposed to raw materials. The older idea of economics is that we don't have a money, Everything is money. And occasionally there are items of transfer that are handy. They are currency. They are more readily tradable than just blocks of raw material, and that allows for a more fluid and faster reacting economy. But we have, over the last century or two, adopted this idea that currency is actually a very specific thing. Money is different from wealth. It's the only thing that's actually intrinsically worthless, and that makes it money, as opposed to all the things that have intrinsic value and can be turned into things of other value. And that's just a very bad way to think about money and to think about wealth and to think about economics. And one of the traps that a lot of the Bitcoin bros fall into is that one. They think about Bitcoin as a far superior currency, which it is, and a better representation of tradable money, which it is, but they think about it as a single currency that needs to maintain some sort of market monopoly in order for it to be viable. And I think that that is the wrong way to think about it. Bitcoin is useful as a means of exchange in a world of other decentralized, uninflatable means of exchange and intrinsically valuable physical objects. The great thing about Bitcoin is that it's super easy to transfer over the internet. And it doesn't get backed by anything, but we can trade it on the internet for anything. So if we can get away from this idea that there should be a single currency that we use to measure our economic capability or personal net worth and turn it into just everything, will be a lot better. Now that would mean bringing back barter. And I'll tell you, the IRS doesn't like barter because they want their cut of every financial transfer that takes place. And that's why they don't like it when you use a few rounds of green tip to pay for a dozen eggs from your neighbor. They don't know actually how to calculate that, and so they would prefer that you only use them Federal Reserve notes and then fill out all the forms. But if we could get back to an idea where everything on Earth has a level of value, and that value is set not by a centralizing authority, but by you or me, I could decide that I have enough green tip, it's not worth that much to me, I want to trade my eggs and my raw milk for 300 blackout, because that's what I'm short on. I have a CNC machine in the back, so I'm willing to trade for these aluminum blocks, because I have the ability to turn them into stuff that I can trade for other things. I think that we have not just a healthier economy, we have a healthier way to think about the economy in general. So I am excited about Bitcoin, but I want to think about Bitcoin as one of many tradable options, not just the best one for the future. That being said, there is something really fascinating about Bitcoin, and it is the cryptological math, specifically blockchain technology. I think that has a lot of value far beyond mere trade and exchange. And we've kind of lost sight about that. There was a while there, a few years ago, when blockchain was one of the most powerful buzzwords in Silicon Valley. Any tech startup worth its salt, any tech journalist would throw blockchain into every other sentence and every single product. And we kind of don't do that anymore because the new one is AI.
Harry could tell that Voldemort was standing right behind him. He felt a great overreaction. Harry tore his eyes from his head and threw them into the forest.
AI is the most powerful buzzword. That's what you got to throw into every single product. But blockchain, this idea of a decentralized ledger so that I can check your work and you can check my work. Nobody can corrupt or poison my ledger because you have a copy of it. They're digitally signed. This has some value beyond money and the transfer of goods. This would be an excellent solution to things like, ballots. Being untracked and uncountable. I think that we could have much safer and faster elections and better election results if we use things like blockchain technology to handle voting. There's another issue that's coming, partly thanks to AI, where botnets on the internet are getting smarter and faster and better at imitating people. So that is a sort of a problem. I would love to know that the people that I'm talking to on the internet are actually the people that I want to talk to, that I'm not talking to a bot who has infiltrated a friend's network, but I'm actually talking to the friend himself. Blockchain would be a great way for me to identify those people on the internet that I trust and know are human beings. Now, the government has a plan for this, which is a large centralized digital ID system. But ironically, the government is literally the last entity on earth that I trust to be able to decide who I should trust. I'd rather go with like gas station loyalty cards than government digital ID at this point. That blockchain technology has value in solving some of the things that I see are coming. And another one is historical revisionism. I've talked about historical revisionism before on the T-Rex podcast and other places, and it's a thing that has always happened to the distant past. We reconfigure the distant past so that we can control the perceptions of the present and the future. We rewrite history so that we can control the narrative, and that generally happens with stuff that is largely forgotten. It happens all the time. This week, the Department of Defense is going to review a bunch of Medal of Honor citations, guys that were awarded the Medal of Honor back in the Indian Wars because they don't merit the Medal of Honor by today's standards. And the best way to virtue signal for the current Secretary of Defense is to revoke a bunch of those posthumous Medal of Honors from those guys. But it isn't even the forgotten past that this happens to. Speaking of Kamala Harris, one of the most amazing things that I have seen in the last week is that she is no longer the border czar, and it is argued that she never was the border czar. Even publications that last year called her the border czar are this year saying that she has never in her life been called the border czar. It's pretty incredible stuff. Also, that her main recommendation is that she didn't actually have any responsibilities. That's the new line. Donald Trump's assassination attempt is a difficult thing to Google for. If you Google assassination of TRU, you will see Truman. You will see anything except assassination attempt of Donald Trump. This is happening in real time now. And so I would love to be able to use something like blockchain to figure out if past sources that I am referring to, either articles or books, have been tampered with, if they have been poisoned. On T-Rex Labs videos before, we've talked about the importance of having a digital library that you control so that it cannot be taken away from you. But as you source old documents from history, whether it is ancient history, public domain documents from the founding of the nation or before, or whether it is stuff from like last week, something like blockchain technology and MD5 checksums and stuff like that to verify that your source documents have not been poisoned may be vital to civilization going forward. So there's a whole bunch of pieces to this that need exploring. And at the moment, I think it bears looking at kind of from a bird's eye view. I'm a nerd and I love to get into the technical weeds about stuff, and I love to read about how stuff is actually calculated in the polynomials. Actually, that's not true. I hate to read about polynomials, but I do like to read about the differences between proof of work and proof of stake and what that might mean and think about it. But right now, I think what may be most helpful is to have a larger and wider view and think about some of the ways that we want to fix actual specific problems, whether it is inflated money, whether it is centrally tracked money, or whether it is stuff like ballots or books that isn't money at all. So I am really happy that the blockchain conversation is coming back and the Bitcoin conversation is getting a little bit wider, and the attention is actually driving what I would call good movements toward both adoption but also implementation. Keep an eye on this space, whether you're a crypto nerd or not. So I forgot to tell you why I didn't film a video at the various conferences that I was at last week. The main one is that this isn't a YouTube channel. I can see where you might be confused, but T-Rex Arms has 3 YouTube channels, and T-Rex Arms isn't a YouTube channel company. We make stuff and we work on other projects. And the stuff that I was doing at the conference was not content related. Now, it definitely got my gears turning and made me want to talk about some of the issues and made me want to tell you guys some of the stuff that I have been thinking about. But to be honest, content is still kind of the tip of the iceberg of what T-Rex Arms is doing and what I personally am doing. So we're very glad that you're here and you're watching the content. But the doing is always going to be superior to the talking. Also, some of the people that I talked to didn't want to be on camera. Some of the conversations shouldn't be public. But whatever you do, don't just consume the content. Get out there and be part of the doing. Be part of the doing and be one of the doers.